Hello everyone, and welcome back to my series of Pokemon card deep dives in which I am reviewing and rating the most iconic Pokemon cards ever printed. Today we will be reviewing one of my favorite cards ever printed in the Pokemon TCG, the Treecko Gold Star from EX Team Rocket Returns. So in this video we will be looking at three aspects of this card. Firstly, its history. Secondly, its collectability. And thirdly, its aesthetics. Ultimately, we will give the card a score out of 10 for each of these categories, and we will then average them out, give it a final score, and we will see where the Treecko Gold Star lands on our leaderboard. Beginning with the history of this card. The Treecko Gold Star is from the EX Team Rocket Returns set. In Japanese, that set was called Rocket Gang Strikes Back. The EX Team Rocket Returns set was from the EX Ruby and Sapphire era of the Pokemon card TCG, which is normally known more simply as the EX era. The EX Ruby and Sapphire is a bit of a mouthful. So, to put that into context, the EX era was the fourth generation of Pokemon cards. As a bit of a refresher, if we have a look here, the first generation of Pokemon cards, which was base set, Jungle, Fossil, Rocket, and all of that. This is what the cards looked like, the very original base set design of card. These particular cards are from the Team Rocket set, the original Rocket set, not the Team Rocket Returns set. The second generation of Pokemon cards looked like this. This was the Neo series of Pokemon cards. There were 4 sets in the Neo series, of course. Neo Genesis, Neo Discovery, Neo Revelation, and Neo Destiny, which is where this Gengar card is from. Pretty similar design in the first and second generation of Pokemon cards. If we compare the two, not a whole lot was changed. Then there was a big shift in the third generation of Pokemon cards, of course, which introduced the E-Series cards. Some of my favorites here. This Feraligatr is my favorite card of all time, in fact. That was the third generation of Pokemon cards. And then the fourth generation brings us to the EX era, which is where the Treecko Gold Star card was from. So, a little bit of history about the EX era, a bit more history. The EX era was based on the Ruby and Sapphire Pokemon games, of course, as the name implies. And those games were very bright, they were very colourful, futuristic at the time. All of that was supported by the improved Game Boy Advance hardware. And of course, Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald, the games were very creative. There was a lot of new mechanics brought in to the games. There were double battles, weather events, Pokemon had natures. And so the Pokemon TCG reflected that shift, that sort of modernization in the aesthetic of the Pokemon franchise. And it was also very creative. The EX era of the trading card game was very creative and experimental in the same way that the Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald games were. The EX era brought in many new types of cards. We saw, for example, the titular EX cards, which we have a few of here. EX cards appeared in all of the EX era sets. By the way, there were 17 EX era sets in total, so there were quite a large number of EX sets. We also saw cards like this in the EX era, which had the stamp with the set name in the bottom right corner of the artwork. There were also very creative Delta species cards, which featured cards with a different typing to usual. I used to think these were very cool when I was a kid, and I still do. There were a very long list of interesting energy cards introduced in the EX era. There were Team Magma and Team Aqua cards. The holographic design of cards in the EX era featured this more refined and sort of ordered holographic reverse pattern compared to the earlier generations. And there were lots of other quirky little cards in the EX era sets. Some of my favorites were these Ditto cards, which featured Ditto in the forms of all of the starter Pokemon. I'm missing the Bulbasaur here, unfortunately. And of course, the most iconic type of card introduced in the EX era was the Gold Star card. I have a couple more here. These are really the main chase cards from the EX era sets. There were 27 Gold Star cards introduced in total, and they all feature shiny versions of the Pokemon, which is denoted by the Gold Star next to the Pokemon's name. I think the Gold Star was intended to symbolize the star animation that plays in the Ruby and Sapphire games when you encounter a shiny Pokemon. So that is a bit of a crash course on the EX era. What can we say about the Treecko Gold Star in particular, though? Well, the Treecko Gold Star, as I say, was from EX Team Rocket Returns. That was the 7th set in the EX era, and it was actually the first set to feature Gold Star cards. And Treecko appeared alongside the Gold Star Mudkip and the Gold Star Torchic, which made sense, obviously, that the Gold Stars would kick off with the starter Pokemon from the Ruby and Sapphire games. Now, one thing I particularly like about the Treecko Gold Star and the Mudkip and Torchic as well, which I think makes them quite unique in the history of the Pokemon TCG, is it is one of the only times that the weakling starter Pokemon have actually featured on the secret rare or chase cards in the set. Obviously, before the EX era, the chase cards all featured the most exciting, powerful Pokemon in the Pokemon world. Here are some cards from the Neo and E series. And then if we look even in the modern day, chase cards typically feature the most powerful, epic Pokemon around. So I've always thought it was quite interesting and unique that the Pokemon Company decided to treat the humble starter Pokemon to the secret rare or chase card status. So overall, I think the Treecko Gold Star is a pretty interesting Pokemon card in terms of the history of the Pokemon TCG, and it is from one of the most iconic eras, the EX era. Now, let's have a look at the collectibility of the Treecko Gold Star card. The Treecko Gold Star, like all the Gold Stars, is a highly collectible card. When we are talking about the EX era cards, it needs to be remembered that the EX era of Pokemon, which came out from 2003 to 2007, that era of the Pokemon TCG was very unpopular. The Pokemon Company and franchise as a whole was not doing very well. The initial hype in the early 2000s for Pokemon had sort of died down. So by the time we got to the EX series, the demand for Pokemon cards was very low. And as a result, the print run for all of the EX sets was very low. So at the end of the day, not very many EX era cards and Gold Star cards were printed. Now, in the modern era, the EX time of the Pokemon TCG is now very popular. People desire these cards. It's an iconic, nostalgic era. So we have a sort of mismatch where there was a very low print run of these cards, and nowadays there is very high demand. And what that has resulted in is a skyrocketing price for all of the Gold Star cards and all of the EX cards in general, actually. In fact, EX era booster packs often sell for more than Neo or E-Series booster packs, funnily enough. Now, if we look at the PSA population data for the Treecko Gold Star, we can see that the population data reflects the low print run. There's only about 1,000 of the Treecko Gold Star cards that have been graded by PSA, and there's also about 1,000 Mudkip Gold Stars and Torchic Gold Stars. Of course, 1,000 is not terribly insignificant, but if we compare that to modern cards like the Moonbryon or the Van Gogh Pikachu, where there's literally tens and tens of thousands of copies graded, it does put it into perspective when there's only about 1,000 copies of the Treecko Gold Star that have been graded. And given the low population of this card, the price has just gone up and up. I actually purchased this card in 2022 for 1,800 Australian dollars. It was a PSA 8. I cracked it out of the slab because that's my preference to have raw cards. In today's market, the same card, a PSA 8 Treecko Gold Star, is about double that. It's now selling for about 3,600 Australian dollars, and that's just in the past 3 years. The PSA 10 version of this card is in the tens of thousands at this point. So it is very collectible, expensive, and in my opinion, quite a desirable card. All right, so now let's talk about the artwork of the Treecko Gold Star. Now, of course, it is a subtle artwork. It's not overly exciting, I suppose, but there is one interesting thing about all of the Gold Star artworks, which is that they were actually the first artworks in the Pokemon TCG to depict the Pokemon breaking out of the four walls of the artwork border. So you can see with Treecko, its fingers are poking out of the border. Of course, nowadays that does not look very notable. Most people probably wouldn't even notice, but at the time that was quite a shift. It was quite exciting. It sort of broke the fourth wall. And the Gold Star cards, as I say, were the first cards ever to do that. If we look at this Alakazam Gold Star, we can see the spoon breaking out of the artwork window. And likewise, if we look at this Suicune, we can also see that parts of its body are also breaking through the artwork window. So really, the Gold Star cards sort of paved the way for the full art cards that we see nowadays, where, of course, the Pokemon take up the entirety of the Pokemon card with the artwork. So it was sort of the first small step towards the modern full art, alternate art cards. Separately to all of that, I do quite like the Treecko Gold Star artwork. It's illustrated by a legendary Pokemon artist, Masakazu Fukuda, who actually illustrated all of the Gold Star cards. You can see it is the same illustrator for all of these. Although I appreciate it's subjective, I personally like the Treecko Gold Star artwork the most out of all of the Gold Star cards, because Treecko was the first starter Pokemon that I used when I played Ruby and Sapphire back in the day. I particularly like this Treecko artwork. I think, as I say, it's a very subtle depiction of Treecko. It looks right at home in some sort of rainforest somewhere. Overall, I think it is a card with a high aesthetic appeal, with all of the greens looking very consistent, and just a tiny slither of holographic pattern in the distant background. Personally, I like these sort of subtle cards sometimes, which maybe are not as exciting as the big, epic, powerful Pokemon depicted in battles and whatever else. I quite like just these subtle cards that show a different, I suppose, more peaceful side to the Pokemon TCG. I should note that I'm quite biased towards Treecko as well, because Treecko was the starter Pokemon that I used when I first played Pokemon Sapphire back in 2003. So, how does the Treecko Gold Star do on our rating system? Let's have a look. So for the history, I'm going to give the Treecko Gold Star an 8. It is from one of the most iconic eras of the Pokemon TCG. It is also the first Gold Star ever printed, or at least it was in the first set of Gold Stars from EX Team Rocket Returns. And as I say, it is quite a unique card in general for depicting a starter Pokemon, a small, weak Pokemon, as the secret rare or chase card from the set. Secondly, for the collectability, I'm going to give Treecko Gold Star a 9. All of the Gold Star cards are highly collectible due to the low print run, paired with the high demand for these cards in the present. Finally, for the artwork, this might be a bit controversial, but I'm going to give Treecko Gold Star an 8 as well. I personally really like this card because of my nostalgia for Treecko in the Pokemon Sapphire game. Does that make this rating system biased? Yes, it does. I guess you can sue me in the comments if you want to. So overall, that leaves Treecko on an 8.3. A strong score. Not as strong as the Shining Charizard that we reviewed last time, but nevertheless an extremely iconic card. Thanks for watching, and let me know which card you would like me to review in the next episode.